Welcome back. Now, in this particular segment, I am overjoyed to see that there is an elder among us that really pushes for masculinity more than I do. Even in his body language in this next video, you'll see he's very stoic, he's very serious, and he wants to impart something to us that's going to be beneficial for us as men. I think it's worth a note. Now, before we get into the video, I want you to understand that this interview is 2 years old, but it still carries the same impact as the day that he spoke these words. As we get into the video, you'll see the individual in question and what he has to say. Let's take a look.
Can you talk about African American men and how this movie speaks to them?
Pain is passed down from father to son and son to son. A lot of pain in Troy's life is a result of the pain and the damage from his father that he then visits on his son. We have to, as black men, be mindful of that. Sometimes it's unfair, and sometimes we take it out on those we love. And I'm guilty of that frustration that we all have. But we have a responsibility and a duty to be fathers, not to just make babies, but to be real fathers. And you can't expect any good to come to you if you don't visit any good on your son or your daughter. So be a man.
50 seconds of absolute wisdom from Mr. Denzel Washington. Could you feel the emotion involved? As I mentioned, he was very stoic, very composed. And so when he went to speak, you could see that there was quite a bit of concern in the way that he expressed himself. He even put himself in the same category as the main character of the story, Fences, Troy. And if you're not familiar with that movie, please go and watch it. It's an accurate depiction, I think, of family life in the African American community, what family life can be sometimes. But now let's get into a couple of the things that Mr. Washington said that I think were very, very key. One of the first things he mentioned is pain visited on a son by his father. And he described that as something that was ongoing. So basically what Mr. Washington is describing in the term that we would use nowadays is a generational curse. Because see, there is a difficulty that presents itself when the father is not present to protect and provide and to lead. There's a difficulty. There are aspects of a boy and a girl's personality that may go lacking because there's no clear guidance in the family. So that particular notion that there is something that's missing that should have been there is passed on. And so the pain of not having a father there to congratulate you in the times where you have done something spectacular, the pain that's involved of a father not being there to help you understand what kind of man you should look for in a husband, the pain that's involved in not knowing how to conduct yourself in the public because you've never seen a clear example of how a man behaves. That pain rolls on. A father passes it to a son passes it to his son, and then so forth and so on. That is a generational curse that has to be broken. And the only thing that has to happen is that one person in this cycle decides, no, the buck stops here. I'm going to be the kind of man and the kind of father that I wanted my father to be. And so I think that that notion that Mr. Washington just put into words is very, very poignant. This happens. And with an 80% single parent, single mother epidemic in our particular community, this is happening more and more, that the father is not involved. And so that pain continues to flourish because there are less and less individuals that are willing to step up because of either parent, because of the faults of either parent. We're not pointing the finger at anyone, but what we are saying is that that particular generational curse has to be stopped, and it stops but individuals decide to do different from what happened to them. The pain that's visited upon you by your father, you don't have to pass that on. You can deal with that pain. You can try to understand the reasons why that pain was visited upon you, the reasons why that pain was visited upon your father, and you can move forward. It's something that you can do. The next one, Mr. Washington, he talked about the frustration that's involved in this particular scenario. And there's quite a bit of frustration. Because if individuals were not frustrated, then they would attack this problem head on. But there's a certain amount of frustration, a certain amount of difficulty that's involved with trying to understand why your father was not present, why he didn't care enough to be a part of your life. Then trying to make the connection that even though that happened to you, it's still your responsibility to be a part of your child's life. So there's a certain amount of frustration that goes along with that. And then if we add in the possibility that maybe the relationship between the father and the mother of a child is strained, then you have added frustration that goes along with the situation. Because not only do you have to deal with the shortfalls that you have as a father, but then you have to deal with the shortfalls that you have as a result of not being able to make that particular relationship work. So it's a lot of frustration that's involved. But it's a situation that's worth it. Because in the end, as I always say, we are trying to produce productive citizens that can go into society and have the things that they need, and in the process, add something. That's what we want as parents. Okay? Next thought. He said something, and I'm really going to hammer on this one. He said it is a duty for us as African American men to be fathers. Why is that poignant? Why do I think that's important? Because notice, Mr. Washington didn't say it's a duty to be a husband. He said it's a duty to be a father. So now, are we discouraging marriage? Are we discouraging men from becoming husbands? No, we're not. But here's the thing. Whether you are a husband or not, when a child comes into this world, whether you're wearing a wedding ring or not, it is your responsibility to make sure that that child has what it needs. That's the essence of being a father, to provide, to protect, and to teach. That's your responsibility. And if you don't want that responsibility, do the things that are necessary not to bring a child into this world. There are many things that you can do. And one of those things is being intentional about the way that you proceed in relationships. If you don't see a future with the mother, don't impregnate her. If you don't see the relationship evolving to a point where the both of you all can be married and bring a child into the world in the best of circumstances, don't even go down that path. Because if you do, regardless of what the mother does, your responsibility is to be a father. No matter how difficult, your responsibility is to be a father. In the next point he said, and I think this is important also, how can any man expect to see good in his life if he hasn't visited good upon those who belong to him, his family, his children? How can you expect to see good if they don't have the things that they need, and that's your responsibility, and you're not taking care of it? How do you expect to see good? Now, we're not saying individuals who are struggling, because it's evident in this particular economy that everyone is struggling. And so, are you doing what you can? Are you giving the most that you can? If you're doing that, then you have nothing to worry about, because you are visiting good upon your child. If you're making time for that child, the most that you can. And from a financial standpoint, if you are sending the most that you can, if you're doing the best that you can, then it's going to be evident. And that child is going to remember, my father did all that he could to help me. He did all that he could, despite his circumstances. And that child will love and respect you for that. And so what you're doing is you're setting a standard as far as manhood is concerned. And you know we're concerned with manhood. You're setting a standard as a man. You're showing your child, both your son or your daughter, what a real man looks like. And I hate to use that term, but it's the truth. I hate to use that because a lot of times people use that phrase real man in a derogatory sense. But what I'm saying is that it's a positive to want to provide for your child. It's a positive to want to set a good example. It's a positive to want to introduce good into your child's life. That's a positive. And since that's a positive, I feel free to attach those qualifications to being a real man because it's positive. The only thing it would do in your life is make you feel better about yourself because you're handling those responsibilities that are uniquely yours. And I believe, for one, that you can do it. I believe that's the king gene in every man. The king gene is your potential to meet the requirements of those around you. You can do it. Now, the last thing, it was 3 words that he closed the interview out with. And I think those words were powerful. He said, be a man. Be a man. And nowhere in that conversation that Mr. Washington had do you see him attaching any negative traits to his last 3 words. He didn't attach any. His encouragement was to take accountability for yourself, then employ the correct discipline that's needed, the correct self-control, the correct stoicism, and then have the determination that's necessary to meet every one of the requirements that might be leveled upon you. You can do it. You can do it. And if you ask me, I know that Mr. Washington isn't perfect, but he's an example of manhood. He's an example of what you can achieve when you have accountability, discipline, and determination. All 3 of those qualities are needed if you're going to be successful as a man. Notice I didn't say be successful from a financial standpoint. What a man has does not determine who he is or what he is. It's the man's personality. It's the man's characteristic, his principles, his values. That determines what kind of man we're dealing with. And if a man can stand on positive principles, if he can stand on positive values and build from there, then he has my vote. That's a real man to me. But those have been my thoughts on the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. As always, be easy.